Okay, History 102. I can't tell you how much I miss seeing you guys. I never thought I'd, well, of course I thought I would miss you, but it's been a while. And I'm now going to start doing History 102 lectures from my studio here. This is the bonus room above my garage. You can kind of, you see just one side of the room. Got windows over here looking out on the street. Television set for people that are up here. Lots of books to make it look like we're scholarly. Got myself a big whiteboard, but I'm not sure that shows up very well on the camera. I've got a cat. That's Jojo right there hanging out. Over here is a bed. Over there is our incredible hoard of toilet paper. We've been gathering so much we possibly can. But anyway, I'm going to do my best to kind of continue the class from this situation. I got to tell you, super hard for me to do this without any kind of an audience. I feel like I feed off the audience essentially. So I'm struggling just a little to make this all happen, but I hope you'll work it. I can work it out with you. So anyway, I want to give a shout out to some of you people out there and hope that everything's going all well to you. Just kind of random set of people. So from the 8 o'clock class, Monday, Wednesday, 8 o'clock, Jeanette and, oh no, I can't even read what I wrote down here. Sorry about that, you guys. And Brandon and Mackie and Jamie and Gabriel and Taylor and Arturo. Hope you guys are doing okay, hanging in there, being safe. From the 11 o'clock History 102, shout out to Libby and Isabel, Delaney, Lillian, Erica, Colton, Caden, Andrew, and Jessica, and all the rest of you. Of course, I want to shout out to you too. From the Tuesday, Thursday clock, Carissa, Anthony, Lisa, Luis, Ashley, Giovanni. Love saying Giovanni. I wish I knew someone, had someone in my family named Giovanni. Cameron, Tess, really thinking about you a lot. Blanca, DeAndre, all you people, and everybody else, of course. Just hoping everything's going well for you guys and you're hanging in there as best you possibly can. Now, one thing that I'm intrigued by is the whatever the algorithm is when I post these on YouTube. You get some. It chooses one image from the class or from the presentation to make the little. You get three choices which one you want. But I'm almost always going like this or something like that with my hands out. Or yesterday I was telling my 101 class about the hanging in effigy, so I kind of did a noose, and so that's the one that they chose. Anyway, just as an attempt to try to see if we can get them to do something different, I'm going to put my little crazy hat on here for a second, and maybe that'll be what they're going to focus on for the little, whatever you call that picture, which is the one that shows the actual video. Okay, I'm hoping that you guys will always, before we go watch any of these lectures, you get yourself your outline ready. This is the outline, of course, for the Progressive Era. The Progressive Era, we're almost done, and it's a good idea to have this kind of on your side as you're, hopefully, kind of going as I'm going through the materials. Not a bad idea to also have your study sheet with you too, so you can make sure that you're aware of the identifications that are going on at that time. But anyway, this is the section where I'm going to try to get us through the rest of the Progressive Era as quick as I possibly can. So, the major topic of the moment, of course, the Progressive Era. This was a moment in American history, and here's my methodology. I've got these little. My wife wrote them out for me, so they're better than something I would do. The Progressive Era, 1900 to 1914. This is a time when Americans were rejecting sort of the chaos and problematic nature. Got to figure out where to throw these things. That had come out of the Gilded Age, of course, feeling a sense of crisis in 1900, a desire to try, primarily motivated by the middle class, who, of course, believed in progress, who believed in science, who were motivated to do good, but also motivated to recreate America in their own image, in the image of the middle class. Inspired by the new universities, decided to do a whole bunch of things that I told you about. The individual reformers like Jane Addams and Margaret Sanger, the muckrakers. I told you that ultimately the reformers will take over the governing apparatus essentially, and the primary activities associated with the progressive are indeed the government reforms that they will ultimately enact. Those reforms will occur on a number of levels, as I suggested to you, of course. They're going to start at the cities. These were where the problems were so local and so recognizable. They're going to move their way to the states with a number of political reforms that become part of the equation and ultimately make it to the national level. And on the national level, the story of the Progressive Era becomes the story of the progressive presidents. And the first great progressive president was Teddy Roosevelt, and I've already given you a sense, of course, of Teddy Roosevelt and the things that he was doing. The three major areas of reform that Roosevelt participated in were in the areas of trust-busting. It's a major campaign of the Roosevelt administration to break up the most obnoxious manifestations of trusts and monopolies. And I told you there were about 42 trusts and monopolies that were busted, including, of course, the Standard Oil Corporation. Inspired by the jungle, Upton Sinclair's The Jungle, Roosevelt will also embark upon a campaign of consumer protection, manifest primarily in the Meat Inspection Act of 1906 and the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906. The final major area of activity on the part of Roosevelt was in the area of conservation. I was telling you this particular story already. And the primary founder of the movement of conservation in the United States, of course, was John Wesley Powell. For some reason, my wife took my notes to say Johann Wesley Powell. That's a cool name. I can't ignore that. But his name was John Wesley Powell, the very interesting, of course, explorer of the Grand Canyon, one-armed veteran of the Civil War, explorer of the Grand Canyon, who ultimately began to preach the notion of conservation. He saw the limitations, of course, of the resources of the United States and began to become the initial preacher, basically, of this idea of conservation, just a critically important idea. Anyway, where I was, I think, in that last tape, was I was telling you about the actual identification of conservation. And conservation were the actual policies implemented under the Roosevelt administration, of course, to confront the issues of our natural resources. I told you that the major player in this was, Roosevelt has all the things he has to do, so he has to assign this to other people. Gifford Pinchot became the major activist as far as conservation is concerned. Different than Powell in that he was an East Coast guy and he was educated in Europe, but the Europeans had already embraced the notions of conservation, thus he would bring their ideas back to the United States of America. The primary idea that he promoted was the notion of sustainable yield. So conservation does mean to use the resources, but to use it wisely and to guarantee that you have that the resource will be sustainable. So I told you that they would begin to employ the concept of conservation in areas like lumbering. I don't know, I think I got to lumbering for sure, but not just lumbering, so that meant if you clear cut, of course, you're going to replant for every tree that you cut down. I don't know if I mentioned selective logging. That's where you go in and just cut the biggest trees, and even though that is somewhat more protective of the environment, of the habitat, it's still highly destructive. I rode my mountain bike through areas where they had done selective logging, and it's like a war zone, basically. Every time you chop down a big tree, of course, it's going to do a lot of damage. But they would also begin to employ the concept of sustainability to grasslands, so you don't overgraze. If it's sheep, you got to move them quickly because they'll eat everything, and goats will do the same thing. If it's cattle, they don't eat everything, but they still can overgraze and damage. They would begin to conduct notions of the soil preservation, of course, soil conservation. That could mean leaving fallow, that could mean contour plowing, and a variety of different activities. And ultimately, of course, water conservation also, water reclamation. In fact, during the beginning of the 20th century, massive program to begin to hold the water of the nation, especially in the western area. And of course, they built dams like it's going out of style. And the dam is both useful in that it holds water as a reservoir, but every single dam is ultimately doomed to failure. It will fill up with sediment, of course, and it also, when you store the water in huge areas like that, you increase the potential of evaporation. That's a problem. The best way we could ever really store water is underground aquifers, if you could get the water down there, of course. And what we've been doing is just really pulling all the water out of these aquifers, essentially. So the idea was to implement the concept of sustainable yield across the gamut of resource areas. And the way to do this under the Roosevelt administration was to create something called the National Forest Service. Yeah, I think that's right, National Forest Service. It was a system, and it's National Forest Service. This actually was created in the late 19th century, so before the Roosevelt administration, but they did these things. They would create something and nothing would happen. So Roosevelt was the first person to really put this into play. And they would create the National Forest Service as a way to oversee the natural resources, essentially. They would ultimately add some 200 million acres into the national forests. As you can imagine, almost all of the national forests are in the western part of the United States of America. And the reason for that, of course, was that they'd already developed so much of the lands of the East, although there's a tremendous amount of forest area back there. But so most of the major forests, are to the western side of the Mississippi River. And I hope you're aware of these national forests that are around us, just to the west to the east, of where we are at Palomar College, the Cleveland National Forest, to the north farther, San Bernardino National Forest, Inyo National Forest, Sierra National Forest. California has a lot of the national forests. The national forests are essentially, these are the lands of the people of the United States of America, held in perpetuity and protection for the people of the United States. And one thing I always like to mention is that they are places for you and I to go, and we get to take advantage of them if we want to. You can get wood by permit and determined location. You can get stones and rocks by permit and determined location. You can't just do what you want necessarily. But if you're like me, you go there to recreate. You can go camping, you can go hiking, you can go mountain biking. Sometimes off-road vehicles are allowed. All of these are components of the national resource. So they're sort of like an interesting expression of socialism. The lands of the United States held in protection in trust for the people of the United States of America. Like so much in America, though, one of the issues of the national forest is that those who get to take most advantage of are large corporations, large lumber companies, mining companies, and others. And there was a time there when the lumbering companies could go in the national forest and cut down 150-foot Douglas fir and pay $5 for it. And I'm sure you guys know that the amount of money that you're going to get from the lumber from a huge tree like that is going to be a tremendous amount of money. Anyway, it's problematic in some ways, but it's still, the national forest creates the foundation of concern with our natural resources and protection, and also, of course, allowing the people of the United States to go there to see, to recreate. Gifford Pinchot was established as the chief forester, so this is the National Forest Service is under the Department of the Interior, and Pinchot would oversee, of course, the implementation of the concepts of sustainable yield. And so this becomes one of the most important reforms of the Roosevelt administration, with tremendous impact and ramifications for the future of America. And all I can say is I very much appreciate that Teddy Roosevelt participated in really stressing the ideas of conservation. I do want you to know that Roosevelt also kind of went beyond conservation. So conservation means to preserve our natural resources so that we can continue to use them. But there are some places in nature, and this is something that Roosevelt absolutely recognized, that were like so incredible that they should be protected, from all usage. And so these were areas that they wanted to be left alone, where you can't go, well, you can go. You could see it, you could recreate, you could camp there, but you couldn't take the resources. They should be left in perpetuity for all time for people to get to see just the wonder and the beauty of all of this. And so what that developed was this concept that we call preservation. Conservation is to conserve the resources. Preservation is to preserve the natural wilderness, basically, so that it will be protected and that we can continue to kind of see it and experience it and glory in it. The primary figure if we're going to, the founding father of conservation is John Wesley Powell. The founding father, in many ways, of conservation was John Muir. And it's really exciting to me to get to tell you, he's doing this out of California, of course. He was a Scottish-born individual, came to the United States, ultimately made his way out to California in the 1860s, fell in love with Yosemite Valley, and he just saw it as this remarkable, and if you guys have been there, I hope you've been there, I hope you go there, just stunning. It's just so intriguing when you drive through that canyon, in the valley, and you see so many people just stopped on the roadside, and they're looking up at the incredible granite monoliths, and their jaws are just agape, basically. And it's also so cool to see how many people from all over the world come to it. Just a amazingly wonderful and beautiful place. Powell began to really promote the concept of preservation. The idea was sort of out there, and so here's what's going on. Conservation creates the concept of the national forest system. Preservation creates the concept of the national park system. So parks are not places that you can use, and take advantage of. They're places simply to go, to see, to recreate in. So it's a little bit different. The national park concept was already in play. The first national park was Yellowstone, and that was designated in the 1870s. But again, they didn't really know what they were doing, and for a long time it was just an area protected more or less by American soldiers who would patrol the area. But even then, there were people that were hunting there and doing other kind of things. So it wasn't really until John Muir comes along to really focus on this notion of the preservation of these incredible natural places. So the government decided that it was a good idea to turn Yellowstone into a national park, Yosemite into a national park, so it would be the second national park. But they just wanted to do the valley. And Muir was the person who convinced them that you can't just be the valley. It's got to be the entire drainage, the entire area that comes into the valley. So instead of a relatively small national park, you've got one almost the size of Rhode Island. It goes all the way to the crest of the Sierras, the pass that goes over there. I can't remember the name of it. Tuolumne Meadows up there, of course, and all the areas that drain into the valley itself. All that becomes the park. And Roosevelt was keen on promoting these ideas. He was important in terms of Yosemite. He would be, well, actually Yosemite was before that, so a little bit earlier, but the Grand Canyon protected, the Sequoia National Park under Roosevelt, many refuges for animals, places where the animals could live. Roosevelt's so interesting to me because he was a killer hunter. He killed probably thousands of animals, basically. And yet, he also had that hunter mentality that we've got to preserve the natural space so these animals can continue to live. So Roosevelt becomes not just important in terms of conservation, but also kind of critically important in terms of preservation. Okay, well that gets us to 1912. In the year 1912. No, it doesn't. It gets us to the year 1908. Sorry, I'm having a little hard time cranking all this up. In the year 1908, there was going to be a presidential election, and Roosevelt had to make some kind of powerful decisions in that moment. Technically, he had not been a two-term president. He'd served most of McKinley's term, of course, 3 years, and then 4 years of his own term. And he was still young. I think he would have been, at that time, about 49 years old, so he was still younger than any person who'd ever been a president. I'm getting a flashing thing I better check out and see what's going on. What's that? Damn it. Something's happening.